Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our event today. My name is Amanda Prasoon, and I'm the Director of Public Interest Financial Support at Berkeley Law. Today, we have a panel of 4 Berkeley Law alums who have got their loans forgiven through federal public service loan forgiveness. So I invited them here today to talk a bit about their experiences. Before we get started, I do want to issue this caveat that our panelists are not here to give you individualized PSLF advice. Definitely look to the Department of Ed and your loan servicer about that. And also, our LRAP program is also constantly changing. So the way that these participants might have experienced LRAP might have changed. So feel free to reach out to our LRAP office and our financial aid office if you have LRAP or PSLF questions. I'm going to be asking the participants some questions as a moderator, but you can ask questions in the Q&A at any time, and I will direct those questions to our panelists. So we have with us here today Dipti Singh from the class of 2007, Shalini Swaroop from the class of 2009, Dylan DeCurver from the class of 2009, and Brendan Darrow from the class of 2010. So would you all please just do a brief introduction about what you're doing now and some of your past work experience before we jump into our questions? I'll start with Brendan since you're unmuted.
Hi, everyone. So I started my legal career at the East Bay Community Law Center, and I worked there for 5 years after graduating, and then went to work for the Berkeley Rent Board after that, and now I work for the City Attorney's Office in Berkeley. So all the wacky policies that Berkeley likes to adopt, they need legal vetting, and it's always pretty interesting to see what they're going to come up with. And I applied for my loan forgiveness back in May of 2021, I think it was. Yeah. And it took several months, and they still owe me a refund for the beginning of COVID, but they claim that I'm not entitled to it. So if anyone has any leads on how to extract those refunds from the Treasury, let me know.
Dipti.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dipti Singh. I started my legal career as a law clerk in the Central District of California. After that, I went into private practice for a year in DC. I was at Williams & Connolly. From there, I did a litigation fellowship at the Center for Reproductive Rights. And then I took on a staff attorney position at the National Health Law Program, where I focused on Medicaid defense and ACA implementation related primarily to reproductive rights and also maternity care. I left to do impact litigation and also oversee medical legal partnership work at Bethzetic Legal Services, which is a legal aid organization here in Los Angeles. From there, I helped launch a nonprofit organization called the Loring Project that focused on litigation related to abortion care primarily, and also provided technical assistance to researchers, providers, advocates in the field related to reproductive health care. And then last year in September, I joined a Planned Parenthood affiliate here in Southern California, Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley, where I am the general counsel. And so that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years since law school.
Great. Dylan?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan DeCurver, and right after graduating law school in 2009, I started at the Department of Health and Human Services in their Office for Civil Rights here in Washington, D.C. as a presidential management fellow. I was there for 5 years, primarily working on Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which is a piece of Affordable Care Act implementation, primarily looking at race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability discrimination with a focus on LGBTQI plus enforcement. I then went to the Department of Justice Office for Civil Rights or Civil Rights Division, where I worked primarily on race, color, national origin, and LGBTQI plus discrimination, both administrative and litigation, and have recently rejoined the Office for Civil Rights here at HHS to head up rulemaking again for 1557. This is the 3rd time that rule will be done, and I am glad to be part of it.
Thank you. And lastly, Shalini?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I graduated in '09, and I began my career as a law clerk at the High Court of American Samoa. Then I came back to the Bay Area and was a public interest fellow at Berkeley Law under David Oppenheimer and Sue Schechter for a year. And then I moved, I had one job representing diverse communities before utility regulators. And then I finally moved on to MCE, where I've been for about 9 years. MCE is a government electricity provider for Marin, Napa, Contra Costa, and Solano counties. And I am the Chief Legal and Policy Officer for MCE. And my practice areas are litigation, contracting, employment, California municipal law, but my specialties are really energy regulatory practice and environmental policy at state and federal levels, particularly how energy equity and policy impacts historically marginalized communities.
Great, thank you all for that piece of background. So let's jump into our questions. I know, Bren, you talked about this a little bit, but if you're comfortable sharing, can you tell us a little bit about maybe how much loan debt you got forgiven through PSLF, or how long did it take you to actually go through this process, which is billed as a 10-year process, but in reality, we know that can sometimes be longer. And this is an open format at this point, so just jump in if you have an answer to the question.
Sure, I can start. When I left law school, I had about $100,000 in federal loans. I also had, I think, about 40 grand in private loans. I clerked and then I went to a law firm. So I wasn't in the LRAP program through Berkeley until after my year at the law firm. So when I became a fellow at the Center for Reproductive Rights around 2010, I believe, I had reached out to Berkeley and participated in the LRAP program. I was just forgiven. So my loans were just forgiven, and they were actually forgiven through the temporary expanded public loan service program. And at that point, I was forgiven about $78,000. And it took, though, initially they said I actually had many more years left, about 2.5 years left in loans. I challenged that. I asked them to do a manual review of all my loan statements. And then when they did that, they said that there were multiple years in which I had not paid my loans, which I knew wasn't true, but I didn't actually save the paperwork. So I encourage everyone to save all of the paperwork that you can possibly save, especially because loans get transferred. And so you can't just log into your account and get older loans. And I actually contacted the LRAP office to see if they'd kept any of the documentation. I believe it was Amanda that might have responded. And they had, this was during COVID, and she very nicely went into the office just to go pull my file and scan me the documents. I gave those documents for a couple of years, actually, to the federal government, and that's how my loans were forgiven. But had I not had those, I think I would still be paying loans for another, I think it was another 2 years that they had told me I still owed.
Yeah, I cannot stress enough or agree more with Dipti when it comes to like, keep your records, have them do a manual review. I asked for a manual review, I think 6 months before I knew my application was going to be due, so that I had it and I wasn't going to find out sort of after the fact that I was allegedly short. Over the course of, I think it only took me 10 years and maybe 6 months to qualify or to get, even though I have spent every single minute of my life post-law school doing public interest work, they at one point compounded my interest after they made an error and added $20,000 to my loan balance. It took me a year to get it off. A year after that, they put it back on. It took me another year to get it off. At one point they said, well, you're in public service loan forgiveness anyway, so what does it matter? And I was like, this is real money, right? Because you never know what's going to happen with your life. This is real money, and it's $20,000 worth of real money. So like, are you going to pay it? Make it go away. And then at one point they told me that I didn't consolidate. So I had like, I don't know, 19 loans. It was a bit of a disaster. At one point they told me that half of them, they like cut in half the number of payments I had made. And so that was another opportunity to ask them to please do a manual review. And so just save those monthly statements, keep the name and number of the person that you talk to each time you call. And I don't know if it's going to be better with a different loan servicer, but the primary servicer for public service loan forgiveness loans, I think, was notoriously shady. And one thing I would recommend, which I did not do, is if you have problems, call your congressperson, call like your state consumer protection, because folks do need to know, and there is a record of that. And so I think that's also important. And I feel like many of us have responded to congressionals where it's like my constituent. And so I would recommend doing that if you ever come up with any challenges.
So nice to hear you, Dylan, after not seeing you for so long. So I just want to note, this is still fairly new for me. I just got forgiven a few months ago, and it took about 12 years. And like Dylan, I had 17 loan sequences, and there were mystery reasons for having different counts on all of those loan sequences. So I had a ton of disputes. Once they took more money than they were supposed to because they hadn't received my income certification. For years, they had different counts on a third of my loans. When I transferred to my Fed loan, once I filled out the first form, you lose 3 to 4 months of payments because it takes them that long to transfer your loans. And so you're not making qualifying payments during that time. For a couple years, they had an online tax form where it automatically populated your income from your IRS tax return, but then it went down. And so I was waiting for that system to go back up, but meanwhile, my deadline had passed, so all my interest capitalized. So I just really want to emphasize that for if any reason you do not send in your income certification form, your interest capitalizes. And that was something that was a significant challenge for me over the years. I know we have so much more to say, so I will stop there.
I'll just add that although I'm deeply grateful that my loans have been forgiven, I made the terrible, foolish decision to get married to someone who also was pursuing public interest. And, you know, some of my friends were clever enough not to actually get married. And this is the reason why, because, you know, her loans have not been forgiven, and she owes, you know, I don't know, like 17 more months of indentured servitude. And if she doesn't work full time, we have 2 little kids, and part of how we survived COVID is by Erin stopping working full time. If she doesn't work full time, it doesn't count. And so even though I am out from under my loans, the payment will be identical starting whenever Biden starts collecting those payments again. So it's a little bittersweet from my perspective. And the amount of money is just comically high. But you know, we also, I mean, we have a family, we bought a house, you know, like it's been okay. It's not all just terrible doom and gloom, but it is quite infuriating. All those same problems that everybody listed, I had all the same stuff. It's just crazy how people whose job it is to look at numbers and corresponding numbers can manage to screw it up almost every time. So that's enough from me.
Thank you all. Okay. Oh, Dylan, were you talking?
Yeah, I just noticed that Anya had asked a question about sort of how do you wrangle multiple loans. I think they have made an exception that you might want to look into about consolidating. It used to be that if you consolidated, it would zero out your payments. I think that was one of the things that they've changed. But one way that worked for me was I just had the automatic deduction. And so while, yes, my loans did negatively amortize, at least when they did that whole wonky, you know, half your loans only have, you know, 50 payments while the rest have 100, I could go back and I just knew that they had always been deducting the exact same amount, which was the total payment per, you know, however many loans I had. So I would recommend that. And I also wanted to share, I had $150,000 forgiven, which is like life-changing, right? So I wanted to put that out there. That's some big money.
Oh, somebody told me somebody from Berkeley told me to open a bank account for this purpose exclusively. And that
100%.
was super clutch because it meant that it was always really easy for me to track. It sounds dumb, but it's like there's this one bank account and the only thing it does is get payments for loans and send payments out to pay loans. And so you can very easily track what you paid and when, and you can see it every month. And it's just, so I did that. Like it's just same bank as my main bank account, but I just called the loan account. And it was very helpful.
Great. Thank you all for sharing that. And I also have a loan bank account, so I definitely recommend that. And in talking about the consolidation, like Dylan mentioned, there used to be this issue where if you consolidated after making qualifying PSLF payments, your loan, your PSLF tally would go back to 0. So that could be tricky, but we're currently in this PSLF waiver period right now, which lasts through October 31st of this year. And if you do have loans with maybe different numbers of qualifying payments on them, you can consolidate them and have that be helpful, but you want to do it before October 31st of this year. And if you're still in school, haven't entered repayment yet, that would be something you want to do before you enter repayment during that 6-month grace period you have. Just interjecting my thoughts there. Okay, next question I have is, did you all know that you were going to go for PSLF, once you graduated, or did your plans end up changing over time after experiencing different career paths or dealing with the loan payments on your own?
I think it was enacted when I was a 1L, if I remember correctly. So yeah, pretty quickly in that period, I was like, well, I guess this is how my loans are going to go away. Because I never expected to make enough money to pay that kind of money back.
I didn't know when I was in law school that I was going to do it, in part because I didn't quite know what I was going to do after law school. And when I clerked at that time, I don't think the program, LRAP at least, didn't cover payments made during a clerkship. I think that changed afterwards, after I graduated. And then I went to a law firm. So then obviously I wasn't eligible then. But I quickly looked at my options when I was making, I think like 50 grand living in New York City, with loans of the amount that I talked about, that I could not have afforded without assistance through LRAP. And so I reached out to LRAP, and then through that program started PSLF. And as Dylan said, it was life-changing for me too. I think at the end of my payments, I was paying just on my federal loans, not my private, $1,200 per month, which, is a lot of money to be doing for many years.
Yeah, I always was planning on doing LRAP and PSLF and having a career in public interest. I'll definitely say, sounds like most of us graduated in the recession or around the recession, and I couldn't find a job for a really long time. And so I just want to say, like, if your life circumstances change for any reason, you break up, or you get married, or you need to move, or your healthcare circumstances change, or you need to make more money, like you're a little bit stuck. And I think I didn't anticipate how much of an impact that would have on me, when making a decision, because I just assumed everything would be the way it was for the next 10 years. So, I mean, I do think that's something I want to flag. And I'm astonished Dylan had it work out at 10 years and 6 months. I've literally never heard about anyone doing that. Good job. And so I think the way I have viewed it is, it's not, of course it's forgiveness, and of course it's a lot of money, and of course it's life-changing, but it's also something you earn through your time and investment and energy into doing it, because it doesn't happen the way the rules make it seem it will.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I always knew I was going to go into public interest, particularly with the JD MSW. Like, nobody's trying to hire me at some, firm. But I guess in my mind, I just never even thought about it. Like, before I started law school, I was basically told, nobody can take your education away from you. I paid my way basically through high school and college, and I just figured law school was going to be one more thing. And so I just imagined, I think, that I would have loans forever and ever and ever. And so I was grateful for LRAP. I was excited that that even existed and that I could use it. And then I think PSLF was maybe something that like helped me sleep at night, but not really, because I think every year it was on the chopping block. There was questions about whether or not, if it did disappear, if folks would be, still eligible. There were discussions of it dropping down to like 50,000, which yes, is great, if you can get 50,000 forgiven, but for so many of us that are coming out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, that was always a bit precarious. And so I just, I would just take deep breaths and like, recognize that like, maybe I will have this forever, or I'm going to stay on it and maybe I can make them go away after 10 years.
Thank you. So I know you've all shared some of your like tips about what are the top most important things to do when you're pursuing PSLF, but is there anything you've missed that other like very important action items that people need to do? And Shalini, I want to start with you because there is a question, a clarification about the interest capitalization, if that's something you can talk about in response to this question as well.
Sure, that was before I got my loans forgiven. So Amanda, you were right.
Okay.
Because every year you send in your income certification form and employment certification form, and sorry, the employment certification form. And so that's what I was referring to, is that one year I sent that in a little bit. Oh, and then you have to send your income separately. So one year I was late in sending my income, and then that's what happened. The interest capitalized. Sorry, it's been a while since I sent in my income form, because this is probably way too technical, but at some point, if you price out of where your loans were originally put, if you send in your income form, they'll actually increase your loans beyond the maximum amount you were told. So I just didn't send in my income form for the last few years, which will probably engender more questions than it answers. So sorry, Amanda. Thing, getting back to your original question, the one thing I'll say is definitely send in your employment certification forms as soon as you leave a job. And I say this because I worked at the High Court of American Samoa. And if I know people right now who are still trying to get employment certification forms from Samoa, and it's not like we can fly, $2,000 in the middle of the South Pacific to get those employment certification forms signed, or even people remember who we were, what we were doing. So you really should do that on a regular basis at the job you're in, and also immediately as soon as you leave a job that you have been in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I switched jobs, as I explained, multiple times, but I tried to do it every year when I was in that job, and like within weeks. It was one of the first things I did after leaving a job. And I think in addition to keeping documentation of timely payments, that's the other thing that I think everyone really should do, so that you don't have to chase down people afterwards.
Great. Okay. I have a question. So obviously there are a lot of PSLF horror stories that you hear in the news. How did that feel while you were pursuing PSLF, seeing those things, and how did you make sure that this type of horror story didn't happen to you?
I mean, I think it sounds like a lot of us took some pretty proactive steps, right? Having that separate bank account, doing our best to keep track of what payments we made. Following, I think the only reason I even caught that $20,000 increase twice was because I was like so excited. I had gotten under $150,000 on my loans, or under 160, and then it went up to like 180, and I freaked out, right? So, always keeping track. Employment certification, every year I did that, even though I stayed at my jobs forever, right? Always have that in the bank. Doing that 6 month, ahead of time, asking for the individualized manual count. I think when I applied, I got mine forgiven in March of 2020, March or April. And I think I just went into it with like, you're not going to catch me. I will be part of the 1% on this. And I had a work colleague, and we would share notes because he was also coming up on it. And so we just had our plan and like executed, but it was really that 6 months for me before going in, making sure that if they tried to come back with any silliness, that I had all of my ducks in a row to quickly react and respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did not know many people that had had their loans forgiven. Even now, I don't know that many people that have successfully had their loans forgiven, although the success stories are becoming more and more. But I think I was a little bit feeling like maybe it won't happen, but I'm going to stay on top of this, because if it does happen, how amazing would that be? So I tried not to be too defeatist about it, even though at the time, I think my peers and I were sort of like, this will probably never happen. They'll find a way to say we didn't make a payment on time, or we didn't do something right, or whatever else it might be. So I wasn't banking on it, certainly, but I was keeping on top of it. And I think some of it was just like anger. Like when they came back, we're like, no, you didn't pay your loans for 3 years. I'm like, oh, I definitely did, because my lifestyle would have looked differently if I wasn't paying these loans every month for 3 years. And so I think that was also motivation. Once I knew I did all the things I was supposed to do, and I still wasn't getting forgiven.
Okay. I have a few questions in the Q&A that I want to jump into. Someone said, for the 3 Ls of the current students are here, a lot of them might be feeling really alarmed. You're saying probably a lot of terms that they've never heard before, or talking about these complicated processes. They want to know, how much did you know about this process going in, or how much did you sort of learn along the way? And what can they expect?
Half this stuff got invented halfway through. I mean, they kept changing the goalposts on us. Every couple of years, they would kick you to a new servicer. There were all sorts of new things that happened. So the one thing that was really helpful to me was having that separate account. And by the end of it, I just focused all my energy on how many qualifying payments there was. Like, there's a chart that they'll generate for you of how many qualifying payments you've made. And so I don't even actually know what the final balance was, because I got sick of watching it negatively amortize and grow and grow and grow out of control. But I did pay attention to those how many payments I'd made qualifying. And so I just kind of charted it out. How many do I have left? And then I would look and make sure that they were giving me credit each time. But it's like, you kind of have to treat it like a part-time job in a way. Like, I had like an alert in my calendar of like PSLF, every month I would go and download the statement and save it somewhere, because your bank account also won't just keep your records forever. It turns out, like, you have to make records of the bank records. Like I asked them at one point for all of I wanted to get like a bound version of it, just give it all to me. And they would only give me the last 4 years. And they said that you had to pay per page for everything after that. So I ended up going back and like going through and finding which ones was I missing, and then getting them, paying for them. So I don't know, it's frustrating, and it's the price of education. And you can thank, the regents and the leadership of the school that decided to crank the tuition up so high for the fact that we're all going to have to do this, but you'll get through it.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think, as Brent said, a lot of these requirements were being created as we went. I graduated in 2007. I think the program actually might have been created that year, or like just before then. But I do think now there are some really great resources that the federal government has put out, Q&As that you can look up about the process. There have been some great articles written in the media about the process. I think there's a lot of resources out there now that kind of describe what you're supposed to do. I will say the actual process of seeking forgiveness wasn't that hard after I got the manual review done. You really just fill out a form, you upload it, and then it felt a little anticlimactic. Like, I logged in one day and I was like, oh my God, it says 0. How could that be? And I almost didn't believe it until I got the letter. There's like, let me save this in case they come back and try to tell me they made a mistake or something. But it is complicated that you need to keep track of these things for a decade, but they have really automated the system. And so you just need to be on top of it, so that if there is a mistake, you have the documentation to show them that there was a mistake. But the forms themselves are pretty easy. They don't take very long to complete or to upload. And the actual process of getting forgiveness once I had, the payments corrected was pretty easy, actually.
Yeah, don't get discouraged. You can do this, right? Like if you're going to graduate from Berkeley Law, you can do this. Is it a pain? Yes. Like, is it tedious some days? Absolutely. But like, it is nothing outside of your skill set. Did I know anything about negatively amortizing loans? Absolutely not. There was a time where Shalini did not accept my IBR certification. And so told me like, cool, your payment's now $2,000 a month. And I said, great. No, it's not. Like, I can't pay that. And so I had them give me a forbearance for 1 month. That's what started this whole $20,000 nonsense. And I said, I do not want my interest to capitalize, because I had learned that along the way somewhere. And they said, oh yeah, no problem. Of course, it'll be a non-forbearance, whatever. And that was fine for like 2 years. And then all of a sudden, retroactively, it's not like they just, like, it looked as though nothing had ever happened, that 20,000 had been there this whole time. And so, you'll notice it. Just if you're staying on top of it, you can do that, right? Like, just take it in bite-sized pieces. And I think it becomes a whole lot less overwhelming. And I completely agree with Dipti. Like, it was very anticlimactic. It's like a 1-page application and you're like, okay, like, I think that's it. Like, there's not even a back to this piece of paper. But yeah, like once you put in all that work, it is somewhat anticlimactic, but then you get to like brag to all your friends, like, I did it. How can I help you do it? Like, I think that part of why probably all of us are on this is this belief in like paying it forward. We are some of the few that have been able to get our loans forgiven. And so just sort of be there for each other as you sort of, swap notes, I think is also a really good way to not feel alone in the process. And then also just help increase your likelihood of getting to that finish line.
Okay, a few of you have mentioned this, but someone in the Q&A asked, how exactly do you request an individualized count of your PSLF payments, or know where to look for that information?
I just called them, their customer service line. You mean for the manual? If this question is about requesting the manual review of the payments?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, I just called their customer service number, said I disagreed with the payment counts. I actually didn't know you could ask for a manual review, and they said, would you like a manual review? And I said yes. And then when you go log into your account, you can see that it shows in the tracker under manual review. And then as they do the manual review, it will give the outcome of their review. And so I think initially after their manual review, it still said those payments weren't eligible. And then I uploaded all of my documentation, and they didn't ask for that. I just did it. And I called them and said that I did it. And then they did another manual review. And at that point, they counted the payments towards 120.
Great.
And I'll just note that right now, especially, they've never really seen this level of people asking for forgiveness, right? Because this program's kind of hitting its stride now, and they're really far behind. And so I, like Dylan, had tried to set myself up for success 6 months in advance, and we're getting closer and closer to the date. They haven't updated my count, so I actually had to email their Office of Consumer Advocacy, and I'm putting that email in the chat. And they were helpful in just kind of moving along their own processes internally. And so I just want to float that, because that was a really important tool for me, and I used it a couple of times near the end there.
Does someone want to talk about, you've all mentioned that, it's just like a 1-page form, but during the application process, what is that actually like? Someone in the Q&A says they're about a year out from applying for PSLF. They've done their annual employment certifications. Is there anything else they need to do except submit that PSLF form? Are they going to have to go back and recertify things that they've already done, or just that simple form?
You'll certify your employment up until that month, basically, that you're requesting forgiveness. So it's one more employer certification form, and then the form saying that you think you qualify. That's my recollection from having done it last year.
Yeah, wasn't it actually the same form? It was like you checked a different box that said I'm eligible.
Oh, that might be right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was strange because you don't have an opportunity to be like, this is why I think you're wrong on the form. So that's why it's so important to do all the stuff that everyone's been describing in it ahead of time. And I ended up making a calculated decision that like they still hadn't fixed my we're not counting this month thing yet. So I just waited another month, and now I had 122 payments on most of my loans and 121 on one of them and 120 on the last one. And then submitted it. And I just said, screw it, I'm not going to get it fixed. But if we'd been paying, that would have been 2 extra payments that I made. And as it happens, I did make an extra payment in COVID that they won't give me back. And whatever, that's not a huge deal to complain about, but I would happily join a class of people all demanding that we be refunded together if there is such a group. And I would think there would be. We're all lawyers, right? So
I was actually credited for payments that I made during COVID. So
they give you back your money?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that I was. I'll go back and check.
My wife got hers
remembering
back.
that incorrectly, but I could check.
I got one back too, friend.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I didn't make that up. I'm like, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And I think that shows why you talk to your friends and your people and figure it out. And like, I know we're not supposed to talk about money, but like, think of it as talking about free money. And then, go from there.
Yeah.
That is one of my questions today. Like, who were your support groups during this process? Did you have peers, like people you graduated with who are here, coworkers? Obviously, you're all working in public service employment. Like, who else were you able to turn to figure things out? Like an internet community, like where should people be looking?
I'll just note there is a listserv for alum called, I don't know, what is it called? Lefty Berkeley Law.
Lefty Berkeley Law alums. It used to be Lefty Bolt alums in the Bay, but then we had to change it, so now it's Lefty Berkeley Law alums.
So that listserv, I think we have a few folks who are very adamant about updating there. And then this is going to sound really weird, but I actually created a Reddit account just for PSLF because there's a million people on Reddit who are all in this scenario. And I've never posted there, but I've just lurked and I've learned a lot.
I don't think I was as, sophisticated as some of the other people on this panel, but I definitely talked to my colleagues in every job I've ever had. And then I would still reach out to the LRAP office and ask questions periodically as I had questions while I was in LRAP. And actually, I think even after I became ineligible for LRAP, which is about halfway through my 120 payments.
Dipti, I know you typed out an answer to this, but someone in the Q&A was wondering, like, how does it work if you're planning to do PSLF, but maybe you're not eligible for LRAP? Is that something that you all went through, like not being eligible for the program? And maybe can you speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, I became income ineligible for LRAP, I don't know, maybe halfway through my 120 payments or so. But that didn't really impact PSLF for me, right? I still really needed those loans forgiven. And so after I stopped receiving financial assistance from LRAP, I just kept going on with PSLF and trying to make my payments, making sure I was in the right plan, all of that kind of stuff. And I did what other folks would do too. I got married, then I think about, should we file jointly? Should we file separately? Like what's gonna increase? Because I was on an income-driven plan, what's gonna increase that? What might impact my taxes? And just kind of, some of that was just guesswork, trying to do the best we could do to suss out what the financial impact of some of these life changes would be. I had a kid, that kind of stuff. But I think it didn't really impact my approach to PSLF after I became income ineligible, except, my out-of-pocket payments obviously went up considerably.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. And sorry, Amanda, did not happen when you were around, but the year that I became income ineligible, I got a notice from Berkeley Law, like, you owe us $3,000. And I didn't have $3,000 chilling around, so I had to borrow money from my mom for the first time ever in my law school career, which was rather humiliating. But I ended up, because I just couldn't pay the lump sum all at once. So Amanda, it might be worth thinking about if folks can pay that off over time.
That process has definitely changed now, I will say, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you. Shalini is referencing that if you like leave LRAP qualifying employment or your income becomes too high while you're in the middle of an LRAP contract, you at times have to owe part or all of your LRAP loan back from that time. And at this point, the LRAP loans have a 0% interest rate. There's a 3-year repayment schedule and a grace period. So those situations hopefully can be avoided from here on out. Okay, someone is wondering, how do you join that Lefty Berkeley Law alum listserv? Does anyone have a link or someone they should email?
Yeah, if you just email the list, we'll add you. I think it's just, let me get the actual address.
Okay, thank you.
Post it into the chat.
Thank you. And make sure to select that you want to chat to everyone, not just the host and panelists. Okay, what about someone in the Q&A asked, like, did you have a tracking spreadsheet of your own, an Excel spreadsheet, like some sort of document? How did you track your payments, monthly tasks, other records? And do you have like a way of doing that that might be a simple way?
I did not have a spreadsheet. I do have a friend who had her own spreadsheet, and she has many spreadsheets in her life. And I think she's much more organized and on top of her general financial life than I am. I think a spreadsheet probably would have been a good idea, because I was certainly relying on the PSLF tracker more than I should have been. But I think you also have to sort of balance what you're able to do. You're doing this for 10 years every month. And so I think I really just tried to make sure that I kept up my payments and saved my documentation. And for what I missed, I was lucky that Berkeley had those documents from years ago. It was when I first, I think, joined the program, and I just didn't understand how much I needed to be keeping track of those things, which I became savvy about later in the program.
I probably have like 5 inches worth of file folders of documentation from my, so if you're a spreadsheet person, that's great. I literally have a folder for each year, and I have like a paper where I was tracking every month by hand, just because that's what made sense to me. But I think however you track it, you definitely need to have a separate tracking system.
I did put sort of like a template tracker as an answer to that question in the Q&A. It could be a helpful way to help you track your payments and other correspondence that you have with your loan servicer. I know some of you are certainly experts about this topic, but if you are married or considering getting married, what sort of recommendations do you have about how that's going to impact your payments and what you should do with filing taxes? Obviously, I'll say, please speak with a tax advisor about your particular situation, but any sort of heads up or things people can think about who are in this situation?
Don't do what I did. Do get married, but maybe don't actually tell the government about it. That's my advice. I don't know. Someone's got to have good tax advice. I don't understand the tax consequences because we made the choice without thinking carefully about whether there was some way to be smart.
I will say that a lot of folks I know who depend on PSLF just have never married their partners, and that's the decision they have made. And I think that is a tough one.
Yeah, I'm about to find out because I got married last May, and we just sort of had delayed, and finally said, F it, like we'll just deal with it. So yeah, I'll keep you posted. We are filing separately in the hopes that like maybe that makes a difference, but my partner has significantly more loans, thank you Georgetown, than I have or I had. So I think it was just finally something that was like, this is too overwhelming to think about. developers can do it.
Yeah, I don't remember what, I mean, we got married. I've been married 6 years, so we probably got married about halfway through my time in the program. I don't think my husband really wanted to get married. So we did not consider not getting married because of my loans. But what we did do is talk to our, the person that was preparing our taxes about whether we should file jointly or whether we should file separately. It was also trying to gauge out the impact on the amount that I would owe on my loan payments because I was under an income-driven plan. And I think for some years we did file separately, and then at some point changed because it didn't really matter. You're gonna take a financial hit in one place or the other, and so it didn't end up matter. We just ended up doing it for the ease of tax preparation at some point. Yeah.
One thing that I don't remember who told me this early on, but that's worth considering about taxes is that, traditional IRA contributions and other like 401k type contributions that reduce your taxable income, reduce your loan payments. And so as a consequence, you get an immediate return to the tune of whatever the percentage that we're paying these days. I think it's like 12% or something like that, on any money that you save in that way. So that was the main maneuver that we did, was try to like reduce our AGA or AGI as much as possible through those kinds of retirement tools, HSA, dependent care account, that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Those are great tips. And obviously we're not tax advisors here in the financial aid office, but we can help you sort of estimate what your monthly payments might look like if you want to go on and take that information to a tax advisor and kind of figure out what's the best strategy for you. I know, Bren, you mentioned owning a home, and anyone else who maybe has gone through like getting a mortgage, did PSLF, your loan balance, like how did that have an effect on the process? And did it have an effect? Did you have to explain the loan debt?
It was surreal. I mean, we kept being like, they're going to stop us, right? Like, they're not going to let us do this. We bought a house for like the same price as our combined debt at the time that we did it in 2013. So, I mean, I think the loan might have literally been exactly the same as the sum of both of our sets of, expanded law school tuition and living expenses. And it just never mattered. It was because we were paying it on time all the time. Our credit was really high. And they just didn't care that there was this giant amount of money that we owed. And so we got a totally normal mortgage. And then we refinanced it like 2 years ago. Again, totally normal, no effect at all, other than maybe improving our credit. So it was weird.
Yeah, I think for me, it just factors into your debt to income ratio that they're considering. But as Bren said, it also is building your credit at the same time, because
yeah, and I think they're using
the
payments, right? They're using the actual payments for the debt to income, not the like total amount of money that you owe.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
So being on income based is really, it brings it into a reasonable amount, right? So they're not, yeah, exactly. They weren't, right. They didn't care that I had 6 figures worth of education debt. It was just, are the monthly payments manageable when thinking about the mortgage?
mhm.
Okay, so we're sort of wrapping up here. So I'm going to get to a last couple questions. I know you've all mentioned you were really committed to PSLF. Did you ever feel like constrained by the employment requirements, like full-time 501c3 or government, or that was your plan all along?
Very much so.
You did?
That's a long time to work full-time continuously for every month. Like, it sounds like not a big deal, but it is. It's definitely, I think you got to plan this like it's going to be 15 years because stuff happens. I don't know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, between jobs, sometimes I would take a break. That was a luxury that I had. And so I wanted to live my life. And so like, maybe I'll be paying loans for a couple more months, but I have this opportunity to take 2 months. I took off. And I did that because that's what I needed for like my self-care and my mental health. And so it did impact my choices in that there was at one point that someone asked me if I would work in the private sector. When I was thinking about that, part of what I was weighing is like, well, now I'm going to have to pay off my loans in a way that I wouldn't if I stayed in the nonprofit sector. And I think I wouldn't have gone that route anyway, but it was definitely, you know, on my pro-con list. It was one of the things that I was considering as I weighed my employment options. But otherwise, I mean, I think for me, at least, like I had to stay on it, but I also had to like make my life choices based on what was going to make me happiest. And that sometimes meant knowing that I might have, you know, maybe 6 or 7 months more of payments. But if I needed to do that, that's what I needed to do.
I wish I had talked to Dipti, because I was like, I mean, I've always wanted to work in public interest. I have no desire to work in the private sector, but especially during COVID, I really just wanted a break. I was having a really hard time mentally. And I think, I'll be honest, like the reason I didn't really take a legit, you know, year-long sabbatical was because I was like 6 months away from being forgiven. And I was just like, I can't keep delaying this, because it's just been this cloud hanging over my head, you know, for so long. So I do think it's been hard. I guess I just didn't expect, you know, a decade of my life to have all of these major changes in it, right? Because this is for a lot of people, it's the age that you get married or have kids or buy a house or move across the country. And there were more life changes than I anticipated. And I didn't have a lot of resiliency to flex with that when I was trying to just get my loans done.
Yeah, I didn't feel that it was a constraint. I think I'm more in the Dipti class, which is like, I didn't actually think they were going to forgive my loans. And so that sort of helped me shape my life. I knew I was always going to be in the public sector. So that stress wasn't there. I haven't had the opportunity to take time off work, but I think, yeah, for your mental health, or, you know, if you need to take a month off and not pay, just ask them for the non-amortizing forbearance. Just always ask, right? But yeah, no, I never viewed it as a constraint.
Okay, and this is going to be the final question that I ask. You know, looking back at this journey that you've been on, how tedious and horrible it could have been sometimes, knowing you had to do 10 plus years of public service work, would you recommend PSLF as a viable path for our grads who are already working in public interest and our students who are considering it? You know, was all this trouble worth it? Would you go back and do the same thing, or would you think about like going to Big Law and paying off those loans in a couple of years?
I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say that the number one best option is don't incur this giant debt. And then second is really annoying process that you have to go through for PSLF. Like that's the second best option, you know, like yeah, it's a lot of money, and I'm very grateful that it has been forgiven, and it was definitely the rational thing to do.
I mean, I wouldn't have chosen any differently. Like I couldn't have afforded to go to the schools that I did without incurring the loans that I did. If I didn't go to those schools, I don't think I'd have the life that I do, that I'm very, very happy with. And so yes, it was a lot of debt, but I took that chance on myself, and I have the life that I have because of those choices. And PSLF like dramatically changed my life. It is amazing to not have to make those monthly payments now. So if you are thinking about public interest work, I highly encourage you to take advantage of the program if you can.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, you know, if you're debating between, oh, you're thinking about some combo of public and private, I'm not sure it's the right thing for you, but there were so many of us who were like, I'm never going to work in a law firm. I'm never going to work in the private sector. So for us, it's like, you'd be dumb not to take advantage of it. And yeah, it's a pain in the butt, but I mean, my friends who are working for plaintiff side law firms, like they have a 25-year time horizon, right? Like they're still paying and I'm done. Right. So I'm so incredibly grateful for my education, and I am really grateful for the PSLF program, because it's what enables me to have the career I want to have the impact I want to have. And, you know, so I would really recommend it for folks who know that they're going to go into public interest no matter what.
Same. I wouldn't change it. even all that debt that I had to take on to get where I am.
Perfect. Well, I am so glad to hear that PSLF worked out for all of you. Every time I get a new email or call about PSLF, I am so happy. I'm glad that your balances are down and you can move on from this. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences with everyone today. I really, really appreciate it. Your firsthand knowledge is so valuable to everyone who is on their way to PSLF. I want to quickly say that if anyone has questions about PSLF, you're always welcome to email. The LRAP email account will try to send you in the right direction or answer some questions. We do have 2 more PSLF events coming up this spring. We have a panel with student loan law experts on April 13th, and then a hands-on PSLF workshop on May 23rd. So continue communicating with us, reaching out, and building your PSLF support network. And that's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.